All right, so we're going to be starting now. So, good morning, everyone. So, on today's episode of the last Friday of the month Microsoft Azure webinar series, we have Adnan. Adnan is back again with us today to walk us through today's topic. And today we're going to be talking about Azure storage services, that is, creating storage accounts and working with blobs on Microsoft Azure. So let's sit back and enjoy the presentation and the demo by Adnan Henricks. Adnan is over to you now.
Hey, thank you, Kazim. Good morning, everybody. Adnan Henricks. Follow me on Twitter with @microspecialist or my other social media channels for more up-to-date news on everything Azure. So let's get started. Thanks for asking me to present on Azure Storage. We're specifically looking at blobs this time. And we're trying to, with every series, just look at a different point or service in Azure. So first of all, people often ask me, why use Azure Storage or cloud service, Azure Storage Services? Well, actually, storage is one of those fundamental things for just about any data center. And the nice thing is that Microsoft keeps on investing in that. Everything that runs in cloud or in your data center is stored somewhere. It has the virtual machines have hard disks for operating systems and for data, and there's different storage locations and places where you just need to store some sort of data depending on the type of data that it is. Now, the nice thing with Azure Cloud Storage is it really makes one specific storage service available, and you can pretty much split that up and store different kinds of data in there. So you could utilize blobs storage on a storage account, table storage, file storage, depending on different types of storage and queues. And the nice thing is you don't have to have all these different kinds of systems in place. It's really just one system, Azure, and you can use that. The nice thing is you can have it's pay as you go, so you could just get it up in 5 minutes and globally available. And when looking at building applications in a cloud environment, you're really going to be utilizing different storage locations or data stores, depending on which part of the application is either accessing data or writing away data. And the best way in which you can do that is really to make sure that every little bit of the application gets its own little data spot instead of all just writing to the same data backend. And, we've all been there. We know that there's difference in speed in reads and writes. And quite often, if you have one sole data storage location, that's generally the bottleneck or the backend whenever you're reading and writing to your database, for example, which is why we have all these different options available to us. So why cloud storage? A lot of options. It's readily available or easily available. You can store different kinds of data sources or data sets available anywhere in the world, and it just really helps in keeping your data persistent, easily accessible, and you can automate backup and recovery in there. Now, looking at the different Azure storage that you can get, we're looking specifically towards more blobs. Now, you can also have different database types, relational database types, but specifically, you're going to need disk storage for your virtual machines. And the nice thing is that there you also have different options. So depending on the performance requirements that you need, you can either get from standard disk, which is just normal backed by HDDs, like magnetic drives, premium disks, which are more SSDs, and then faster ultra disks. So depending on the performance requirements in your virtual machines, you can go and attach these different kinds of disks to them, all created from a storage account. Object storage, things for just storing any kinds of data. Then we'll be looking at Azure Blob Storage, binary large objects. A blob is specifically a file, you could say, that's being stored. And we have also the new Data Lake Gen 2, which is for large-scale analytic data. File storage that I mentioned, Azure files, Azure NetApp files, things for data transportation. You can have an Azure data box to either move or migrate data in and out of Azure, and have hybrid storage, for example, where you can have a data box sitting in your own data center, and any data that gets written there on the data box gateway or edge gets synced to Azure storage. When it's either not needed due to latency, because there's always latency when you deal with cloud. So that's one of the options that's really available to use. With the coming back to the intelligent cloud and in a real cloud environment, you have different data workloads. For example, your application side. So depending on the type of application and type of data needs, you have the Azure storage service that's made available through different endpoints. For example, blob storage made through object REST APIs. You have HDFS, SMB, NFS, all different protocols that you can go and speak to the storage services or underlying storage services, depending on what's being hosted. So when looking at blob storage, disk storage, and file storage, it's on the same, or it could be on the same storage account or the same storage service. It's just being made available differently. And the nice thing now is we can split up different storage tiers. So, data that's not being accessed anymore can filter down and be set to archive storage, and just have data tiering set up on our storage accounts, which makes it so much simpler. And it's also saving a lot of money, because if you're steering everything as hot, you're paying the most price when some things maybe get written once and only accessed every so often, instead of highly accessible data. And obviously, looking at different architecture, if you're going to be looking at large big data kind of data sets, then you're looking at the Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2 option, file namespace, which is more hierarchical and allows for faster reads, writes, and analytics. And then you have the single storage architecture for normal storage. Intelligent edge options, I mentioned the data box where you can import, and also the Azure APIs for the Azure Stack or IoT options. And then if you have any data center integration with the Azure cloud, things that you can set up like Azure Backup, Site Recovery, File Sync, and they will all sync data from your own data center into Azure storage, depending on the type of storage that's requirement. Security, always a big one. Encryption is always on by default through the Azure storage service. And the thing here is, you can trust Microsoft and use their keys, but I've seen lots of companies in the enterprise that have their own key managed system set up in place already in work on premises, and they prefer to utilize that. And the nice thing is, Microsoft says, well, if you have such a system, you could just set up Azure storage service encryption to use your own keys. And once again, you could set that up also with the Azure Key Vault, so that those kind of things can be managed. More in Azure, there's a lot of hybrid connectivity with on-premises databases, data warehouses, and cloud just gives you that data stores when you need it. Traditionally companies always have to go through long time frames to even just order a single disk if they need to expand their own data center or SAN. And with Azure, you can pretty much set up something in half a day and get the data up there in a couple of hours, depending on the amount of data, obviously. But later I'll go and show you guys how easy that's some of the options that you can go and view and look up. So with some of the options for data storage versus the whole on-premises storage option, you know, the cost effectiveness, you know, Microsoft buys, you could say buys in bulk, and we save. So it's always cost effective. You know, there's no dedicated hardware that we require on premises because that's generally what the company needs to do. And Azure is, you know, proven technology. It's reliable. Your data is replicated on multiple locations, so it's always safe. And you have multiple different storage options. So quite often, it doesn't matter what kind of data set you're working with or kind of data structure, unstructured, structured data, it's always available for you. So with that brings me to my first demo. And I'm just going to sign into my account over here. Just give me a second. I'll show you guys in a second so everybody can see my screen. I'm just signing to my Azure portal. So one of the things when going to storage accounts, I'm just going to view and do it through the Azure portal. I've already got a couple of storage accounts set up. Just want to go into this one. It's got a name, and I've got the resource group, my subscription, a lot of information, and just to show you quickly where it can be split up into containers, which is really where I can create and store my blob data, file shares, tables, and queues. So depending on the type of application that I'm building or the type of workload that I'm hosting, I can use different specific storage account. So just quickly, just going back there and clicking on add and just creating a storage account. I'm just going to use the same resource group. Due to the requirements that Azure sets on us for storage accounts are generally made available as a HTTP or HTTPS endpoint or REST point. And because of that, they immediately or can be made available worldwide, you know, so they can be made available worldwide through that HTTP, HTTPS endpoint. For that, every storage account name needs to be unique across all of Azure storage accounts. So quite often I get asked, you know, like, how do you deal with this? You know, how do you work with it? So normally I'm a true believer in random, but you know, a lot of people want to make sense of the words. So ideally you got enough characters to play with, 24 characters long. It can only be lowercase, letters, and numbers. So no fancy characters or anything included. So with that saying, you guys are Lasso. This will be a storage account, and we can just call it Azure Web 001. And once you get the green tick, you know that that name is unique. So ideally, you want some sort of resemblance of maybe why you're using that, but that's also something that you can put in the tags. Always stick and use those tags. Location, very important, because we want to know exactly where our storage account will be, especially for companies that deal with data sovereignty. And this is exactly where you have everything in hand. So Europe, West Europe. And this is the other thing, you know, where Europe, West Europe, and sometimes people want to, especially where I'm based, our region pair for Europe, West Europe, is Northern Europe, and that just happens to be in Ireland, in Dublin. So quite often people were incorrectly leaving the default replication set. if you can have a look, you'll see that the replication set is actually read access due redundant storage. So it wasn't really Azure that was making a mistake and just putting the data everywhere. Location is not enough. So if I want to make sure that my data is not replicated to another region, if I don't require that, I will go and either split it up into one of the other replication options that I'll do. I'll go more into detail on the different replication options, but for now, locally redundant storage, it only needs to reside in one data center or one zone. Performance, I can split it up into standard disk and premium disk. So premium disk is backed by SSDs based on the use. I'm just going to leave it as standard, and depending on the access tiers, I'll either specify this as cool or hot. Now, this is also where I'll use hot if I'm going to be writing to this storage account frequently. Cool if I'll be using this for archive purposes, write once and only read it maybe once in a while, or really just use it as backup, but I will leave it as hot for the demo. With networking, I can specify if the storage account needs to be made available to all networks, which is worldwide on the internet or an Azure, or I can create it or hook it up with a public endpoint and specify it to one of a specific network. Now, this could be a virtual network in my subscription. For example, if I just cleaned up my subscriptions recently, but I can set it up with a virtual network in my own subscription, or I can create a private endpoint, get a public IP address, and add other virtual networks to my private endpoint. Then it's only accessible through the private endpoint and not on internet. So private endpoint, more security. I got more control over who accesses my storage account. So I'm just going to leave it with public endpoint. And then this is where I can specify more settings, but I'll show you later where I can go and adjust these settings. Tags, I can specify a tag, for example, a cost center or information that shows me the storage account's use or whoever's paying for my storage account. So I'm just going to go to review and create and just click on create. And the nice thing about storage accounts is it's you could say software defined storage. You know, it's pretty fast and it will be up and running and made available really quickly as being provisioned and set in the background. So I'm just going to go back to storage account, and as you can see, it's already succeeded. I'm just going to refresh my list. What's happening here? Oh, there we go. So my storage account is done. Now I've got my storage account. I can go and specify the type of data I want to store. So I want to go to containers. I want to create a container. I give it a name. Just going to call it Legos Blobs. And this is where I can specify different kinds of access. For example, on the type of access, because it's a HTTP, HTTPS endpoint, depending on the type of data, I can set it as private or allow anonymous access. I'm just going to leave it as default so I can have a container. And once again, I can go in there, I can upload data immediately. Select the file locally on my machine and then upload specific data to it. For example, on templates. So I'm just going to click on any option and just add it or upload it. So it's basically just uploading that file, and there my file resides in Azure. Now, normally you won't really use this option. I mean, you can, but I'd go to, you'd use an application like an Storage Explorer, which is like a file explorer kind of thing. And I can utilize the Azure Explorer, which is something that you can download. I've already got it installed on my machine. So you pretty much just download it under resources, downloads on the Azure.com website. And it's a file explorer that allows you to manage your storage accounts. So where you can upload data. You can also use different like as copy, PowerShell, CLI, etc. to copy data. But I just want to show you what it looks like. Just open it up on my shared screen. For example, I've got the storage account. If I go to blob containers, you'd see the blob that's been created in that container. And this is also where I can upload, download data, create new folders or containers, etc. So this is quite a handy tool. And depending on how you want to access your storage accounts. Now I've signed in using my Azure account, so I have access to all my subscriptions, my storage accounts, all my different ones. I could also attach it and open a specific storage account. And for that, I just want to go to back to my Azure portal. Now, under my storage account, I've got different settings. For example, access keys. And this is pretty much where my encryption keys are set with a connection string. So with the connection string or with the storage account name and the key, I can get access to the storage account and then with Storage Explorer upload my data or programmatically through PowerShell, CLI, any number of different SDKs through an application, just by utilizing the storage account name, connection string, or the encryption key. I can replicate my data as well if I have them. Encryption, I want to just quickly show you before we get back to the rest of the presentation. For example, here I've got Microsoft managed keys, but as I said, if you have your own key gen system, you can just select custom managed keys and connect it up to Azure Key Vault and your own key management system. The same with if I connected this to either private endpoints or virtual networks, I can just go to firewalls and select network and then go and connect or set it up to only connect to a specific network. Okay. Now, encryption keys, storage accounts, and the connection strings, I can further define what's being saved on the storage account by setting up a shared access signature, where I can specify certain restricted access rights on the storage account. For example, I only want to allow blob services from the storage account. I can deselect file, queue, and table. And the same way I can specify a specific permission set, define which permission, for example, only read and list, and whoever gets the shared access signature, once I've generated that, if they access it with a shared access signature, they will only have read and list access. I can specify a start and an expiry date, and also fine-tune the connections from a specific public IP and select or specify a specific key and then generate the shared access signature with a new connection string. Whoever gets that will then be accessing through the permissions that I have set. So it just shows that there's quite a lot of security you can go and set on a storage account. When looking at more security, for example, you could hook up advanced threat protection from Azure, which is the extra service to protect your Azure storage. And you could pretty much look at that through the security center. And that uses the ATP service that will pretty much utilize things like machine learning. It will look at who's accessing your storage accounts and what kind of access are they doing. And it just makes it that much safer for security vulnerabilities that could affect your storage accounts. So that was that for the demo. So that's, I've showed how easy it is to create a storage account, and I created a blob container. I uploaded a blob or a file. Now, typically, like I said, you know, Azure storage is pretty much at the heart or one of the foundational services for any data center, and especially at Microsoft and Azure. So you can see that all the different services, underlying services that are being hosted are somehow utilizing some sort of blob storage or some data lake large scale. So I pretty much split up my session into the type of feature sets that make up Azure storage. For example, it's durable and available, secure and compliant, the manageability and cost efficiency, and just fine tune and looking deeper in all these different options that's being listed over here. So generally called the storage pillars of Azure. So when looking at durability and availability, we had a look at the replication. So the data replication is either replicated. Now, the thing is, Microsoft always ensures that your primary copy is secured. And this is the way that they enable that. Now, depending on the option that you select, you will generally be paying a bit more to save that data because you specifying the number of replicas that Microsoft will need to provide. These kind of specifications, for example, the cost for them, you can see that in the cost calculator and the cost management once it's set up. So locally redundant storage is typically 3 replicas in one region. So it's generally protected against disk failure in one rack and ensures that the replicas are split over different nodes and racks. So pretty much following the update and fault domain principle. Zone redundant, typically spread over different zones, a minimal of 3 zones within one region. For example, a single region is made up of multiple data centers, and one data center could be a zone. For example, the data center in Dublin in Ireland is split up into multiple zones. And if you specify zone redundant, it will keep a copy and synchronize the write to those zones in synchronously. So if you still not happy with one zone or zone redundant within one region, you can do geo redundant, meaning you'll have 6 replicas. So 2 regions, so region A, and in the region pair, due to the fast latency, low latency, fast connection, you can protect against regional disasters. For example, here in the Netherlands, most of the Netherlands is, below sea level. So if some of the dams or the dikes, with the rising sea levels, we'll be looking at a certain, water problem. And having 3 different copies in another region. So within the primary region, it will be synchronously copied in the same region and asynchronously copied to the second region. So this is also something to look at. Now, all these copies are only for use for Microsoft if something happens with their infrastructure. But if you specify read access geo-redundant, you can get a readable copy of one of the copies in the secondary endpoints. So that you can query, that you can look at. Once again, these copies are not really meant for backup purposes. It's really just for the actual data that's being written to or read from. So that's a lot for storage durability. Now, some of the options that gives a little bit of extra, where if you're working with dual redundant regions, for example, geo zone redundancy, where you can have extra zones and also read access copy, just to make it that much safe, and secure your data. Once again, depending on the option that you choose, there is a cost. So you will have to calculate, do your own risk assessment based on where you will be storing which data center and the type of data that you want to store. So when looking at object replication specifically, you can pretty much have user-defined blob replication within the same region, cross-region, depending on if you're using data tiering. So if you will be using data tiering, you can specify user-defined options, which data you want to have filtered and tiered, just reducing the latency in your application. There are some requirements to this, and that is that you will have to have versioning and change feed on. Some of the options that make this, possible. By version number, Microsoft will then be able to check which part of the data blob has been updated or hasn't been updated in a while, and based on that version number and also the change feed. The change feed is really just what's changing that blob. Quickly, I'll go into more detail later. And then Microsoft can see, well, it hasn't been accessed in a long time, so I can just replicate it or specify in a different region. So that's replication. More look at secure and compliancy. I've shown you the encryption keys, where the managed keys is set, or where you can specify your own custom managed keys that you make available through Azure Key Vault. That's based on your own custom keygen operation or any third-party key stores. You can set up Azure AD identities to have some sort of conditional access and identity protection on the data. And we can use things like role-based access control to just further fine-tune access to different storage accounts and containers, and utilize things like privileged identity management, PIM, for things like just-in-time access. So if you set up and one of your IT guys need to have access, they can request access through PIM and get access to those storage accounts, and everything is monitored and controlled and connected in a nice way. So let's say somebody or an application tries to get access to that, signing in, utilizing the Azure identity. So you can set it in Azure AD identity and specify system assigned and add role assignments for role-based access control. One of the options that we also have is called in writing immutable blobs. Now these are pretty much data that you want to store for a long point in time. So you want to write it once and make sure that nobody accesses or rewrites over that data or blob. So it's a way of protecting the blob from overwrites or deletions, or quite often in for legal purposes, a lot of companies and also government purposes when it comes to things like tax information for businesses that needs to be held for a certain number of years, or legal documents that shouldn't be affected. For example, different regulatory compliance. You can put a hold or legal hold, or put a setting on it to store the amount of time that you want to enable the data to be remain secure. So one of the options is just in setting an access policy on that data, and then you can't access or like rewrite it or delete it. Now, when doing something like this, you really have to make sure that you understand the consequences of your actions, because I've seen people that have done this with data that they don't really want to store, and for some reason, the hold is on it and it's locked, and once you pretty much set the policy on the data, you can't really change it, because that's just how the concept works. So time-based or a legal hold for specific businesses. So you could play around with it to test it for, let's say, days, or legal hold for a number of years, and then just confirm, etc., and store it in that way. So the thing when it comes to working with your costing and your storage, you can pretty much have access tiers for every kind of workload, right? So depending on the amount of data and how frequently you will be accessing the data is really just something that you need to think about when you're setting the hot, cool, and defining premium, because premium might be high for now, but the thing is, the same time archive data, it's low cost, but once you access archive data frequently, you're paying per read, so the cost could be high. So a lot of good use case would be looking at archiving server backups, native application data storage, and maybe even file type data on file shares. But when you're looking at really high volume, high transaction type of application and active logging to a storage account, you'd look at the premium type of data tier. So with the access tiers and different APIs that you can go and connect with it with the policies that you can set, where you can upload data to a specific tier of the choice, depending on how the storage account is split up. So you can set it into the type of data store, and there's also the default storage account tier that you can set, that you've seen by the creation of my storage account. So my default might be set, but I can also set different data tiers, just allowing you to save money and optimize your performance for what you need. So high priority retrieval, you store data from archive, copy blob API improvements, also batch copies by utilizing the batch API or any large HPC kind of interaction on utilizing data on storage accounts. So lifecycle management, the access tiering, where you can base rule-based automation for the data tiering and your data retention, from moving data when it's not been utilized for a considerable amount of time to cool storage or to archive storage. and from cool to archive, or just to delete old snapshots that you maybe made of disks or your storage, blobs or containers. And you could just play around with that. So these rules executed daily on the storage account, and depending on the type of data that you've set, we'll just run over them. Change feed is really just a ordered log on the data or the blob. Blob creation, deletion, modification, changes, where any information is pretty much stored. So you don't really have to go and constantly list and compare properties of data. It's really just an additional service that can utilize things in the replication. And we've seen quite a lot of people really excited about this, and also the object versioning, where you can have different versions of different blobs, same blob, different version, and depending on the if you've set it as one of the features, it will just be created automatically. So this is great for things like accidentally deleting. So soft delete, you can protect against accidentally deleting data, have the version checking, and just put back a specific version. Think of traditional snapshots that we used to have on our computers, where we do a version check and we can just restore. Blob indexing is where you can easily tag for filtering and managing the data. So a tag value on the blob is pretty much, it can be changed, but index is pretty much consistent. That helps with things like API support, integration, lifecycle management, object replication, by just looking at which the index of the different blobs that's defined, that's being stored. So with that, I just want to go back to the next demo that I have set up, just to have a look at back. So last thing we looked at was setting up advanced threat protection. Now, because generally when working with Azure storage, you're going to be running some sort of application, and quite often things like websites are run as an app service. But now one of the things that is still available with storage accounts, because it's basically accessed as a website through a HTTPS endpoint, you could also set it up as a static website. So that's one of those things. So storage is a lot cheaper than maybe running an app service. And in one of my demo environments, I've actually have set up a storage account. I just want to set that. It's pretty much a serverless application. That's run on a storage account. I just want to go to if I this was Goop. So I'm just going to go back to my storage account, Azure Function app. So the idea behind my application, it's one of my demos that I use quite frequently. And instead of using an app service to host my web application, it's basically just a static web page. You click on a button and you can import different pictures locally. You can access it through mobile, and it works and functions as any normal web application. Now, let me just try and open up on my computer. STG. Yeah, so this is pretty much the application. And it basically allows me to upload pictures from my computer. And this is something that you guys can also try. If you can see and make out the link, you pretty much just need, okay, this DNS name. So if you can see that, you can connect to it. And it allows me to upload, choose a file, and okay, let me go. I'm just gonna choose something and just upload it. And it's just refresh. Yeah, there we go. So it's just uploaded a file. I've seen that I've uploaded it before, so it basically just put him in the same order that he was. But this is where I've just uploaded this file, and it allows me to show it. Now it's running as a, you know, the web part is running on a storage account. As you can see, HTTPS, and this is pretty much the name of my storage account. I just want to go back to my Azure. Yeah, this is not really working that nicely. Let me just refresh. So that's my storage account. And by going into my containers, these are the different containers that's been created. And web is pretty much where my application is running. So it's really just a simple JS website. It's got web jobs, images, and thumbnails. And these are some of the images that have been uploaded. So you can see the different blobs that's been uploaded, when it's modified, access tiers, and also the type of blobs that's been utilized. If I go to logging, so this is where some logging has been set up. Different logging data. And also just my information, when it's been created, etc. Now I am writing to the storage account through my function, or the programmatic part of my application is running as a function. I'm also utilizing Azure Cosmos DB as a data store to store data in a different. I could also set up pretty much like a normal cloud type of application. We have different data stores, and depending on the type of application module or part of the application, I can make sure that that application portion, written as a microservices or cloud-based application, writes to different locations or different data stores in the same application. So not just one single backend like the database. For example, it's fine running now, but if I had like a million people utilizing it at the same time and I only had one backend, there could be some latency and performance issues. But if I have multiple different storage places and locations, not every part of my application is reading and writing from the same part, and I have some computer vision. So in my function, I've just sped up certain functions to For example, if I go to resize image, looking at the code, or you can see that I'm using, looking at data, my image path, the thumbnail path through my storage environment, integration. It's triggered by the data that gets written on my blob storage. So, a function is just a portion of an application, and the trigger to that is that something gets uploaded to a storage account, and then my function runs. So this function really just looks at the Azure blob storage, which is called my blob under images, and then the blob connection string that it's utilizing. Same thing in my other, like upload URL. If I look at the integration, it's HTTP triggered. And you could see that it's utilizing the Windows Azure storage SDK for .NET, utilizing storage blobs. And it's really just looking at the, utilizing that shared access signature with the blob token, writing, getting access to that storage account and writing data to that storage account. So this is one of the ways that you would use it programmatically. I've shown you with the Azure Storage Explorer how you can utilize that, etc. But this is pretty much where you as a developer or application will just use a specific SDK depending on the language of your application, and then just utilize those calls to the storage accounts. So just getting back to the presentation. How are we doing for time now that we've ran a bit late? But like I said, depending on the language that you will be developing in, there's a specific SDK that allows you to connect and utilize the accessing of the blobs or the data within the different, through the different languages, JS, .NET, Java, etc. And also an extensive storage partner ecosystem that you can go and look at and have a, just try and see where you can utilize it based on your language of choice. Now, when utilize things like data lake or large data set, big data, it's really just a different API that you connecting to ADLS API for the data store that's set up as a hierarchical file system that allows you to still utilize things like Azure AD integration, role-based access control. It's the same blob storage service. So HDR, high availability, disaster recovery through the different zones, and read access, geo-redundancy, the data management settings that I've already shown. And there's more, there's Microsoft is creating new preview features all the time. And a lot of things in development to just make it that much easier to utilize in large-scale enterprise applications. So even more scalability and performance. For example, having high throughput block blobs that can have really fast reads. For example, in this picture view, a single 1.5 terabyte blob using 4 virtual machines in 120 seconds, so that's quite fast. So it's really just increasing single blob read rates and account limits with almost instantaneous throughputs. So really pretty much the same type of blob and storage service that we used to. And when especially migrating petabytes of data to Azure, there's things like the Databox family, there's the Storage Explorer, there's also the AsCopy tool that you can also download. and then run in command line form. And that really just allows you to copy data to storage accounts. If you really have large amounts through your network bandwidth and limitations, you will go and order a data box through the Azure portal, copy it locally. So Microsoft sends you a data box, you copy your data, you send it up back to them, and they just really attach it, and you have your own job set up that will run and can copy, import that data into your storage accounts, really just making it that much easier. And not just that Microsoft provides, is also the different or rich partner ecosystem for backup and archiving data. For example, Veeam, NetApp, that allows people that are already utilizing these different vendors in their own data centers to really just connect up easily to Azure and get working really fast. Even some solutions built on Azure, Veritas, Cloud Data Archiving, eDiscovery, Metallic, Commvault Venture. So a lot of partners are even running on Azure. And I want to leave you guys with one of the options, especially if you want to go and invest more into learning of storage, especially the Azure Administrator, or even the learning path for AZ-104, which is the new one, which I hope everybody is working through during this time working from home. I've put up the link, and I'm sure that you guys can have a look at it later. But there's a lot of modules, 10 hours worth of time that you can go and invest and work around and play around with utilizing Azure storage, creating blobs. And I just want to point out once again that, it's really one of the foundational services behind the whole Azure platform is the object storage, and really everything is going to be storing data. So with that brings me to the end of my presentation. So now I'm available for questions if we have any. Unfortunately, giving the presentation, I won't be able to see which questions might have been asked. That was Kazim's job as a moderator. But please, if you have any other questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, look me up, send me a message, or just hook up with me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, everything. My life's an open book on the internet. You can easily find me with @microspecialist, or bother Kazim. He can point you in the right direction. Do we have any questions, Kazim?
Okay, there is a question here. Somebody wanted to know how Azure Storage compares to OneDrive for Business.
It's really the use, OneDrive for Business is more things that you'd use for normal administration, or let's say in your application, in your normal day-to-day working with your office files, your personal files that a business needs to work in. You could pretty much recreate that using Azure files and Azure File Sync and making file shares available. But OneDrive has been designed, also runs on Azure, by the way. So it's really some of the features and functionality that Microsoft made available, like OneDrive, OneDrive for Business, etc., that they've allowed companies to be able to create their own custom, you could say, by utilizing Azure services. So in a way, you'd use that because it's already part of and parcel of Office 365. And if a company has that, why go and, recreate something if it's already there? So I always say use Office 365.
Okay.
And also check out my app, guys.
We should check out your app, you said?
Yeah, well, if you go to the, if I'll show you, if you go to, I just want to go back and everything you need for Azure is listed on the docsmicrosoft.com. Under Azure, you can go to storage, and on the blob storage, you will find everything that I pretty much told you about. For example, an overview from the introduction to nice quick starts, working with blobs, and they pretty much give you a step-by-step approach, which is one of the things it's difficult for me to go and blog about setting up everything when Microsoft is doing such a great job doing that, showing you how to not only do it through Portal, Storage Explorer, PowerShell, but also how you can use different SDKs. Some of the tutorials are similar. Actually, mine used to be a tutorial for serverless computing, uploading. This is a different type of app, you know, so they give you some of the requirements. You pretty much need a Azure subscription. You can create a free account, and then the steps to go and recreate one of these tutorials. How to use things like AsCopy if you want to migrate data, performance, hosting a static website, which is pretty much what I've done. So you could work through some of these things, and they give you everything you need. You just need an Azure subscription and step-by-step approach. How to set it up, how to deploy your website, especially for the guys that want to go and look how to encrypt and decrypt through Azure Key Vault. It's all step-by-step.
Okay.
But I want to.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
I also just want to add quickly, and thanks once again. And for maybe next month, if anybody does have a question or they want to know something about something specific, they can just let you know, and we can work on bringing that out to everybody. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Adnan, for taking out the time to share your knowledge with us today again on the webinar. And thank you everyone for joining the call today. So you can view the upcoming webinar, on the website, on the LASU CBT 18/webinar is the URL. So like Adnan mentioned, we do this twice every month. There is the Power BI part of it, and there is the Azure part of it. And, we trust that, Adnan would be here to put us through all of those Azure topics, those different Azure topics. So thank you very much for joining in, and let's do this again next month. Bye-bye.
Sure. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you so much. Thank you.